When Emily arrived at the factory, she greeted her co-workers with a smile. "Good morning, everyone. Let's make this a great day," she said, trying to spread positivity. Her colleagues appreciated her attitude and many responded with enthusiasm. Emily had always believed that a harmonious work environment could make the hours pass faster and feel lighter. While she worked, Emily chatted with her friend Claire, who stood next to her on the production line. "How's Matthew?" Claire asked as she stitched another garment. Emily smiled despite the visible exhaustion on her face. "He's doing well, thank God. It's been hard balancing everything, but we're managing. He started selling candy at school to help out. He's such a special kid," Emily responded with pride and a touch of sadness in her voice. The factory manager, Mr. Johnson, watched Emily with disdain. He had never liked how well-liked she was by the others and felt jealous of her informal leadership. Seizing an opportunity, he approached Mark, the factory owner, while they made a round through the production floor. "Mark, we need to talk about Emily. She's been causing problems lately. Her productivity has dropped and the others use her as an excuse to get distracted," Johnson said, manipulating the facts to harm Emily. Mark listened carefully, unaware that the manager had personal motives for bad-mouthing her. "This is serious, Johnson. We need maximum efficiency here. If she's really affecting performance, maybe it's time for her to go," Mark said without looking deeper into the issue. Emily continued her work, unaware of the conversation that would decide her future. At lunchtime, she sat with Claire and a few other colleagues to share a simple meal. "Sometimes I feel so tired, Claire, but seeing Matthew smile when I get home gives me strength," Emily confessed while biting into a piece of bread. "He's the light of my life." Claire took Emily's hand and smiled, her eyes shining with genuine admiration and affection. "You're an incredible mother, Emily. He's lucky to have you," Claire said, encouraging her, her voice full of conviction. Emily felt a lump of emotion form in her throat as she looked at her friend. "Thank you, Claire. I don't know what I'd do without you," she replied, feeling tears threatening to fall, but this time they were of gratitude and comfort. At 3 p.m., Mark called Emily into his office. She entered without suspicion. "Mr. Mark, what can I do for you?" she asked with a smile that quickly faded when she saw the serious expression on his face. "Emily, I've received complaints about your performance. Unfortunately, we can't keep you here," Mark said, trying to sound firm but with a trace of doubt in his voice. He avoided direct eye contact with her, feeling a twinge of discomfort as he said the words. Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "What? But this can't be right. I've always given my best here." "Please, Mark, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice trembling. Mark avoided her eyes. "The decision is made, Emily. You need to leave immediately," he said, closing the conversation with a hand gesture. His seriousness left no room for Emily to defend herself. With tears in her eyes, Emily packed her things and left the factory. As she walked home, she thought about Matthew and their uncertain future. "How am I going to support him now? What if I can't find another job?" She took a deep breath, trying not to lose hope. "I need to be strong for him," she reminded herself, wiping away her tears. Emily entered her home with a heavy heart. Unlike anything she had felt before, she tried to hide her sorrow when Matthew came running towards her. "Mum, how was work today?" he asked, his eyes bright with curiosity. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the knot in her throat tighten. "Matthew, we need to talk. Something happened at work today," she began, trying to keep her voice steady as they sat down on the couch. Emily thought about how to explain the inexplicable to a 10-year-old. Matthew looked at his mother with growing concern. "What happened, Mom? Are you okay?" he asked, holding her hand. Emily felt the tears burning her eyes, but she knew she had to be strong for him. "I got fired today, son. My boss said I wasn't doing a good job, but that's not true. I've always given my best," she explained while gently stroking Matthew's face. She saw the confusion in his eyes and felt her heart break even more. In the days that followed, Emily found herself struggling to stay positive. She spent hours searching for jobs, but every door she knocked on seemed to close in her face. "We don't have any openings at the moment," she heard again and again, as she tried to hold back her tears. The reality of unemployment began to crush her. How am I going to pay the rent, the food? Matthew's school, she thought, feeling more desperate by the day. The bills began to pile up, each one a cruel reminder of her new reality. Emily knew she had to act quickly. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she opened yet another bill. I need to find a solution. I can't let Matthew go through this, she thought, trying to stay calm. The idea of asking for help made her uncomfortable, but she knew she had no other choice. Maybe Claire can lend me some money, at least to pay this month's rent, she thought, though she hated the idea of relying on others. One night, while making a thin soup for dinner, Emily felt a wave of desperation. What am I going to do if I don't find another job? She asked herself, staring at the nearly empty pot. Matthew entered the kitchen and noticed the sadness in his mother's expression. Mom, why are you so sad? He asked, hugging her. Emily smiled weakly, trying to hide her pain. I'm just worried, my love, but we'll be okay, I promise, she said, feeling like a liar, but unable to admit the truth. Matthew, not fully understanding the situation, decided he would help in any way he could. I'm going to sell more candy at school, Mom. Maybe we can make some extra money, he said with the determination of a child. Emily felt a mix of pride and sadness hearing this. This shouldn't be his responsibility, she thought as she gently stroked her son's hair. You're a wonderful boy, Matthew, but that's my job. I'll figure it out, she said, trying to sound confident. Each day that passed, Emily felt more hopeless. The sleepless nights, filled with worry about the future, began to take a toll. Am I really that incapable, she wondered, recalling the words of the manager who had fired her. She began to question her own abilities and self-worth. I've always been dedicated. So why is this happening to me? She asked, feeling a growing pain in her chest. The uncertainty was eating away at her, making it difficult to hold on to any hope. One morning, Emily decided she couldn't continue this way. I need to find strength for Matthew, she thought, getting out of bed with renewed determination. She sat in front of the mirror, trying to convince herself that everything would work out. You'll find a way, Emily. You always have, she told herself, like a mantra. Despite her fear, she knew she couldn't give up. I'll fight with everything I have, she decided, as she prepared for another day of relentless job hunting. One afternoon, after returning from another failed attempt at finding work, Emily found Claire waiting at her doorstep. Emily, I heard about your firing, and I couldn't believe it when I found out, Claire said, hugging her friend. Emily felt the tears well up again. I was fired, Claire. The manager said I wasn't competent enough. I've been trying to find another job, but it's been so hard, she confessed, relieved to finally open up to someone. Claire held Emily's hands, looking her in the eyes with firmness. Emily, you're one of the hardest working people I know. Don't believe the lies of that manager. We'll figure something out together, Claire said, with a determination that rekindled a small spark of hope in Emily. Thank you, Claire. I don't know what I'd do without you, Emily replied, feeling a little lighter. We'll get through this somehow, she thought, as they went inside to discuss the next steps. That night, Emily went to bed feeling a bit more hopeful. With friends like Claire, maybe I can get through this storm, she thought, hugging Matthew before they went to sleep. As she closed her eyes, she promised herself she wouldn't give up. Meanwhile, Mark sat in his office, staring at the papers on his desk. He had always prided himself on being a fair and demanding business owner, but the rumors Claire had brought to him were starting to unsettle him. Did I make a mistake? He wondered, recalling his conversation with the manager. Claire, a long-time and trusted employee, had requested an urgent meeting with him. I need to hear what she has to say, he decided, taking a deep breath. Claire entered Mark's office with a determined expression. She knew she had to be careful, but also direct. Mark, thank you for seeing me, she began, trying to keep her voice calm. I came here to talk about Emily's dismissal. It was unfair, and I believe you need to know the truth. Claire felt a knot in her stomach as she waited for Mark's reaction. He gestured for her to continue, his face unreadable. Mark listened closely, sensing the seriousness in her eyes. "Claire, I trusted the information I got from the manager. He said Emily wasn't fulfilling her duties," he replied, trying to justify his decision. Deep down, though, he was already starting to doubt the manager's claims. "I've always believed that justice should prevail in my factory," he thought, feeling a twinge of uncertainty. Claire took a deep breath, feeling the pressure of the moment. "Mark, you know Emily. She's always been one of the best employees here. She's a single mother who does everything for her son," Claire said, her voice filled with emotion. The dismissal was based on lies from the manager, who has personal issues with her. "You can't let this stand," she implored, her voice shaking slightly. "I understand the responsibility of doing what's right," Mark replied, furrowing his brow, reflecting on Claire's words. "If this is true, I've made a terrible mistake," he thought, feeling a wave of guilt. "Claire, I'll investigate this further. I promise, if there's been any injustice, I'll do whatever it takes to correct it," he said, trying to reassure both her and himself. He knew he couldn't ignore the words of such a respected employee. Claire felt a sense of relief hearing Mark's words, but she knew the fight wasn't over yet. "Thank you, Mark. I hope you'll do the right thing." "Emily doesn't deserve to go through this," she said as she stood to leave. She felt a weight lift off her shoulders, but she was still worried about Emily's situation. "I hope this helps in some way," she thought as she walked out of the office. Mark sat for a moment, reflecting on the conversation. "I need to find out the truth for myself," he thought, determined to investigate the situation. He picked up the phone and called the private investigator he used in cases of doubt. "James, I need you to investigate the dismissal of an employee, Emily. I want to know the truth," he said firmly, knowing this could lead to uncomfortable revelations. But he couldn't allow injustices in his company. Emily, still at home, tried to hold on to hope. Will anything change? She wondered, feeling helpless. She knew Claire was trying to help her, but she wasn't sure if it would be enough. "I need to keep looking for a job. I can't depend on others," she thought, as she reviewed her resume once again. The daily struggle was starting to wear her down. The following days were tough for Emily. She began taking on odd jobs to make ends meet. She woke up before dawn, exhausted, while Matthew still slept peacefully. She felt a mixture of love and overwhelming responsibility. "Everything I do is for him," she repeated to herself, drawing strength to face another day. In the streets of the city, Emily sold small trinkets and homemade sweets. Each sale was a victory, but the profits were minimal. "I hope I make enough for dinner," she thought as she approached another group of tourists. "Hello, would you like to try a traditional sweet?" she asked with a forced but hopeful smile. Still, the financial reality weighed heavier by the day. When she wasn't selling on the streets, Emily cleaned houses. Each job was a battle to maintain her dignity amidst the humiliation. "I need the money," she thought as she scrubbed floors and washed windows. "I can't afford to refuse anything," she constantly reminded herself, using Matthew's image as motivation to keep going. "He depends on me," she repeated, like a silent mantra. Matthew, aware of his mother's struggles, decided he needed to help. "I'll sell more candy at school," he told Emily one morning as they drank their coffee. Emily looked at him with a mixture of pride and sadness. "My son, you shouldn't have to worry about this," she replied, trying to hide her tears. "But if that's what you want, I'll support you," she said, knowing he felt the pressure, which made her even more determined. The nights were the hardest. Emily lay in bed exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop. Will things ever get better? She wondered, staring at the dark ceiling. The uncertainty about the future consumed her, but she tried not to let it break her. At least Matthew is okay, she thought, listening to his soft breathing beside her. I need to be strong for him, she reminded herself, determined not to let the weight of unpaid bills and growing responsibilities crush her. Emily struggled to balance priorities, but there was always something lacking. How am I going to pay the rent this month, she thought as she stared at the pile of bills. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming, but she knew she couldn't give up. I'll find a way, she promised herself, even though hope was in short supply. Every small success was a victory for Emily. I sold all the sweets today, she thought with a smile of satisfaction. Matthew ran towards her, happy with the results of his sales at school. Mom, I sold everything. Can we buy that book I wanted? He asked, his eyes shining with excitement. Emily felt her heart warm. Of course, my love. You deserve it, she replied, proud of her son. Despite the moments of joy, the emotional stress was always present. Emily felt the weight of responsibility and the lack of stability. I need to find a steady job, she thought, knowing that the odd jobs wouldn't be enough to support Matthew in the long run. The uncertainty crept into her thoughts, though she tried not to let it show to her son. I need to be strong, she reminded herself constantly. Emily knew that her daily struggle wasn't just about survival, it was about securing Matthew's future. I want him to have better opportunities than I did, she thought as she planned for the next day. She dreamed of a future where they didn't have to worry about basic needs. I'm going to make it happen, she promised herself, determined to keep fighting, no matter how difficult it became. Amid the challenges, Emily and Matthew found moments of joy and love. We're going to get through this together, she told him, hugging her son tightly. The daily struggle strengthened their bond and showed their resilience. One day we'll look back and see how much we've grown, she thought, feeling a spark of hope in the midst of adversity. And so, despite everything, Emily continued with the certainty that her love for Matthew would help her overcome any battle. Meanwhile, the private investigator that Mark had hired began gathering information. He interviewed co-workers, reviewed records, and spoke with the manager. Inconsistencies in the stories quickly began to emerge. Something's not right here, thought James, realizing that there was more to the story than the manager had let on. He knew he needed to present his findings to Mark. Mark, anxious for answers, received James's report a few days later. Emily was dismissed unfairly, the report concluded, detailing the manager's lies and manipulations. Mark felt a mix of anger and shame. I've made a terrible mistake, he thought, as he read the detailed pages. He knew he needed to correct the situation. Mark sat in his office feeling the weight of the decisions he needed to make. Claire's words about Emily echoed in his mind. Have I really committed such a grave injustice? He thought, staring out of the window. A memory from the past resurfaced, bringing with it the melancholy of a lost love and a child he had never met. He felt his heart tighten as he remembered Anna, the woman he once loved deeply. They had met at a business party and quickly fell in love. Mark had never felt such a strong connection with anyone before. She made me believe in true love, he reflected, recalling the happy days they spent together. But that happiness was abruptly interrupted when Anna told him she was pregnant. Mark's initial joy soon turned to pain when she revealed that she didn't want to be a mother and would terminate the pregnancy. Anna ended the relationship and moved to another city. They never saw each other again. Sitting in his office, Mark felt the painful burden of the past once more. That was the hardest situation of my life, he thought, feeling guilty for not having convinced Anna to keep the pregnancy. He had always blamed himself for not fighting harder. I could have been a father, he reflected, the weight of responsibility still heavy on his heart. The discovery that Emily was a single mother only deepened his anguish. He knew how hard it was to raise a child alone and admired her courage. Mark stood up and began pacing back and forth, trying to push away the painful thoughts. I can't change the past, but I can do something in the present, he decided, with newfound determination. He knew he had to find a way to help Emily and somehow redeem himself for the injustices that had happened in his factory. I can't let another innocent person suffer because of bad decisions, he thought, feeling more resolved. It's not fair that she was fired based on lies, he concluded, feeling his anger grow towards the manager, who had manipulated the facts. Mark decided he would do whatever it took to correct the mistake and ensure that Emily had a second chance. Mark sat in his office, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. I need to know the truth about Emily, he thought, picking up the phone to call James again. James, I need you to investigate what happened to Emily after she left the factory. I want to know everything, he said, trying to ignore the growing guilt in his chest. James accepted the task without question. I'll start right away, Mark. I'll update you soon, he responded, jotting down the details. Several days passed and James gathered detailed information about Emily. She's been doing odd jobs, cleaning houses and selling sweets in the streets to survive, he informed Mark when they met again. She hasn't been able to find steady work and is going through financial hardships, James continued as he handed over the reports. Mark felt a sharp pang of guilt as he listened. She's struggling so much and I was part of the problem, he thought, feeling even more responsible. Mark read through the reports carefully, each line increasing his discomfort. She's a single mother, doing everything she can to support her son, he reflected, admiring Emily's resilience. How could I have been so blind, he wondered, recalling Claire's words. He knew he had to act quickly to help Emily and correct the injustice that had been done. I can't let this stand, he decided, feeling a renewed sense of determination as he read through the reports. Mark thought about Emily's son, Matthew, a child who depended entirely on her. He's just a boy, relying on his mother for everything, he reflected, feeling an unexpected connection to the child. Mark had never had the chance to be a father, but Matthew's situation stirred a protective instinct within him. I need to do something for them, he concluded, feeling the urgency of his mission. He knew that his intervention could make a significant difference in their lives. Mark decided that he needed to see the situation with his own eyes and speak to Emily personally. James, can you give me Emily's address? I want to talk to her directly and apologize, he asked, feeling a mixture of anxiety and determination. James nodded and provided the address. Mark knew he needed to approach this carefully and sincerely. She deserves an explanation and an apology face to face, he thought, as he prepared for the difficult conversation. The next morning, Mark drove to the address James had given him. When he arrived, he took a deep breath before knocking on the door. I hope she'll listen to me, he thought, feeling a mix of nervousness and resolve. Emily answered the door, surprised to see Mark standing there. Mr. Mark, what are you doing here? She asked, feeling a mix of anxiety and curiosity. Mark knew he had to be honest. Emily, I'm here to apologize in person. I made a mistake by trusting the manager's words without looking into the matter more thoroughly, he began, feeling the weight of guilt in every word. I've learned that you've been going through a hard time and I want to offer my help. Please let me correct this injustice, he said, hoping she would accept. Emily, shocked by the unexpected visit, felt a whirlwind of emotions. Can I trust him? She wondered, remembering everything that had happened. Emily looked at Mark, assessing his words and the sincerity in his eyes. Mr. Mark, this has been very difficult for me and my son, she began, her voice trembling with emotion. But if you're truly willing to help, I'm willing to listen, she said, feeling a small spark of hope. Mark felt relieved by her response. Thank you, Emily. We'll find a solution together, he promised, determined to make a difference in her and Matthew's life. Mark and Emily sat in the small living room of her home, discussing how to correct the situation. I want to offer you your job back with better conditions, Mark said, watching for her reaction. Emily felt an immense relief but also a lingering worry. I need to make sure this doesn't happen again, she thought, expressing her concerns to Mark. I understand, Emily. I'll take measures to ensure that justice prevails in the factory, Mark replied, feeling more determined than ever. As they continued talking about how to rectify the injustice, Mark noticed the modest and cozy atmosphere of Emily's home. He looked around, trying to get a better sense of her life. Suddenly, his eyes landed on a portrait on the wall, an image of a pregnant woman he knew all too well. Anna, he thought, feeling a chill run down his spine. He stood up abruptly, unable to believe what he was seeing. Emily, startled by Mark's sudden reaction, also stood up. What's wrong, Mr. Mark? She asked, her voice filled with concern. Mark pointed to the picture, his face pale with shock. It's It's Anna, and she was pregnant, he said, his voice trembling. Emily frowned, trying to understand the connection. Yes, that's Anna. How did you know her? She asked, beginning to piece the puzzle together. Mark took a deep breath, struggling to process the flood of emotions. So, you were friends? He asked, still in disbelief. Emily nodded, sadness in her eyes. Yes, we were very close friends. I miss her so much. Unfortunately, she passed away after giving birth, and I ended up raising her child as my own, she explained, her words heavy with emotion. Mark felt a whirlwind of emotions as tears began to well up in his eyes. Oh my God, this can't be true. Oh my God, he repeated, trying to grasp the reality of the situation. Emily, nervous and confused, asked, What's going on? Anna was my girlfriend. She told me she was going to terminate the pregnancy and move to another city. I never saw her again, Mark explained, his voice breaking with emotion. A heavy silence filled the room as Emily absorbed the shocking revelation. Emily stood there, trying to take in the impact of the news. Oh my God, so you were Anna's boyfriend? I can't believe it's you, she said, her mind reeling. Mark looked at her, his eyes still filled with tears. She told me she was pregnant and was going to end the pregnancy. What happened? Please tell me everything, he begged, desperate for answers. Emily knew she had to explain everything. She took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. She moved to another city for work, when I also ended up in the same place. She told me she was pregnant, but she didn't want to be a mother. On the day she was supposed to terminate the pregnancy, Anna had a sudden health issue and couldn't go through with the procedure. She reflected on it and changed her mind, deciding to have the baby, Emily explained, remembering each painful detail. Mark listened attentively, absorbing every word. Emily continued, her voice soft but steady. I was by her side and told her that if that was her decision, it was okay. We were very close, and I wanted what was best for her. On the day of the birth, Anna had complications and passed away. Since I was the only person she had in that city and she had no family, I stayed with the baby, she said, feeling the weight of the memories. I loved Anna dearly, and when I saw Matthew for the first time, I felt an immense love for him. I raised him as my own, she confessed, tears in her eyes. Mark felt a storm of emotions as he listened to Emily's story. Does Matthew know you're his adoptive mother? He asked, his voice still trembling. Emily nodded. Yes, he knows. I've always been honest with him about the truth. We have a good relationship, and I do everything for him, she said with a sad smile. Mark felt a mixture of gratitude and sadness, recognizing the sacrifice Emily had made. She's taken care of my son as if he were her own, he thought, his heart tightening. The shock of knowing that the woman he had fired was the adoptive mother of his biological son left Mark stunned. He felt both joy knowing that Matthew had been well cared for and sorrow for having wronged the person who had cared for his child all these years. The room was filled with emotion, a heavy silence hanging in the air. Emily looked at Mark, sensing his pain and confusion. Mr. Mark, I know this is a lot to process, she said, trying to offer some comfort. Mark nodded, still trying to make sense of it all. I never imagined finding her this way. You've been incredible to Matthew, he said, his voice filled with gratitude and remorse. Emily felt relief hearing those words, but she knew the road ahead would be difficult. Mark took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. Emily, I want to do whatever it takes to help both of you, he said with renewed determination. I don't just want to correct the injustice I caused, but I want to be present in Matthew's life, he affirmed, feeling a new sense of purpose forming inside him. Emily nodded, seeing the sincerity in Mark's eyes. We'll work together to give Matthew the future he deserves, she said, a new hope shining in her heart. And so, both of them prepared to face the future, united by the truth and their love for Matthew. Mark was still processing the revelation when he turned to Emily, his eyes still full of tears. Where is Matthew now? He asked, trying to remain calm. Emily responded with a gentle but firm expression. He's at school. I'll be picking him up shortly, she said, watching Mark's reaction. He felt a strong and immediate urge to meet his son. Can I go with you to pick him up? I want to meet him, he asked, his voice full of emotion. Emily hesitated for a moment but saw the sincerity in Mark's eyes. Of course, we can go together, she replied, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. They left the house and got into Mark's car. During the drive, the initial silence was broken by a sincere conversation. Emily, I think we should reveal the truth to Matthew gradually. He's just a child, and this information might be too much for him all at once, Mark suggested, trying to find the best approach. Emily nodded, agreeing with Mark's sensible suggestion. You're right, I don't want him to feel overwhelmed, she said, looking out the window, thinking about how the meeting between Matthew and Mark would unfold. We'll start slowly and see how he reacts, she decided, feeling a bit more prepared for what was to come. When they arrived at the school, a new wave of anxiety washed over them. They parked the car and waited near the school gate. There he is, said Emily, pointing at Matthew as he exited the building carrying his backpack. Emily walked toward him, holding his hand. Matthew, I have someone special I want you to meet, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Mark felt his heart race as he saw the boy approaching. Matthew looked at Mark with curiosity. Who is he, Mom? He asked with the innocence of a child. Emily smiled and replied, This is Mr. Mark. He's the owner of the factory where I used to work. Matthew frowned, remembering the conversations he had overheard at home. Oh, is this the man who fired you unfairly? He asked, looking directly at Mark. The moment was tense, and Mark felt ashamed. He knelt down to be at eye level with Matthew, trying to appear as approachable and sincere as possible. It's true, I did fire your mother unfairly, Mark began, feeling the weight of his words, but I'm here to fix that mistake. Today, I went to your house to apologize to your mother, and I've offered her job back. I care about your mother and about you. I'd like us to be friends, he said, his voice full of sincerity. Matthew looked at Mark for a moment, evaluating his words. He felt the honesty in what Mark was saying, and though he didn't fully understand everything, he knew that his mother trusted him. Okay, we can be friends, Matthew responded with a small smile. Mark felt a wave of relief and emotion wash over him as he heard those words. Thank you, Matthew, he said, tears filling his eyes. Mark leaned in and hugged Matthew, kissing him on the forehead. You're a very special boy, he said, feeling deeply moved. Matthew, surprised by the intensity of the hug, asked, Is everything okay? Why are you hugging me so tight? Mark smiled through his tears. I'm hugging you tight because you're a very special boy, he repeated, feeling a deep connection to the child he had just met. He wasn't ready to reveal the full truth yet, but he knew that time would come. The moment was charged with emotion, and Emily watched the scene with tears in her eyes. She never imagined that this day would come. We're on the right path, she thought, feeling a renewed sense of hope for Matthew's future. Mark, still kneeling, continued holding Matthew with care. I promise I'll do everything I can to be present in your life, he said, feeling a new sense of responsibility and joy. Emily, moved by Mark's sincerity, placed her hand on his shoulder. Thank you for being here, Mark. This means so much to us, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Mark stood up, feeling stronger and more determined than ever. We're going to work together to make sure Matthew has everything he needs, he affirmed with newfound confidence. They got back into the car, ready to face the future with hope and unity. During the drive home, Matthew continued to ask Mark questions. Mr. Mark, have you always worked at the factory? He asked, curious about the man he now considered a friend. Mark smiled, feeling more at ease. Yes, Matthew. I started working at the factory many years ago. I've learned a lot there, and now I want to use what I know to help your mother and others, he replied, feeling grateful for the opportunity to be a part of Matthew's life. When they arrived home, both Emily and Mark knew that the road ahead would still be challenging, but they were determined to face it together. We're going to make things better for Matthew, they thought, united by a common goal. And so the first of many steps had been taken with the promise of a better, love-filled future for Matthew. Emily woke up early the next morning, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. Today's my first day back at the factory, she thought as she got ready. She was grateful for the second chance and knew that Mark had fired the manager who had lied about her. I hope things will be different this time, she thought, determined to give her best. When she arrived at the factory, she was greeted with smiles and hugs from her colleague Claire. You're back. We missed you so much, Claire said, embracing her. Emily smiled, feeling the warmth of the welcome. She knew she had a new opportunity to prove herself, and she was determined not to let anyone down. Mark added, with the old manager gone, things will really be different this time, he said with renewed hope. Meanwhile, on weekends, Mark began visiting Matthew regularly. They got along well, and each visit strengthened the bond between them. I really like it when you come over, Mr. Mark, Matthew said one day, while they played ball in the park. Mark felt warmth in his heart. I like spending time with you too, Matthew, he replied with a smile, knowing he was building something special with his son. Mark knew there was a truth that needed to be revealed. He and Emily had decided that it was time to tell Matthew that Mark was his biological father. We need to be honest with him, Emily said, nervous but resolute. Mark nodded, feeling a knot form in his stomach. Yes, he has the right to know, Mark replied with a firm voice. They both knew it would be difficult, but they were ready to face Matthew's reaction. That weekend, Mark and Emily called Matthew for a serious conversation. Matthew, we need to tell you something important, Emily began, holding her son's hand. Matthew looked at both of them, sensing the growing tension. What's going on, Mom? Is everything okay? He asked, his eyes wide with anxiety. Emily took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. Yes, everything is okay, but we have something very important to tell you, she said, exchanging a significant look with Mark. Emily continued, feeling the weight of the moment. Matthew, you know that I'm your adoptive mother, and that your biological mother died during childbirth. I was never able to find out who your biological father was, she began, her voice soft but firm. Matthew nodded, remembering the conversations they had had before. Yes, Mom, but what's changed? He asked, confused, frowning as he looked from one to the other, his stomach churning with anxiety. Emily exchanged a glance with Mark before continuing. Recently I discovered who your biological father is, and he's here with us. It's Mr. Mark, she revealed, watching for Matthew's reaction. Matthew froze for a moment, his eyes wide with surprise, as shock and confusion washed over his face. His eyes filled with tears, and he began to breathe faster, struggling to understand the unexpected truth he had just heard. Mark stepped forward, kneeling down to be at Matthew's level. Yes, Matthew, I'm your biological father, and I love you very much, Mark said. His voice filled with emotion, his eyes locked on Matthew's, trying to convey all the love and regret he felt. His eyes began to shine with unshed tears, and he extended his hand, hoping that Matthew would take it. Matthew felt a rush of confusing emotions. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, feeling anger and sadness all at once, his lips trembling as the pain of betrayal and confusion took over his heart. He stepped back, feeling lost and hurt, his eyes full of tears. Emily tried to explain with a soft and comforting voice. We wanted to find the right moment, Matthew. We knew it would be hard for you to understand, she said, trying to calm her son, her hand extended toward him but hesitating, knowing that he needed space. She felt the pain of seeing her son so confused and hurt, but Matthew wasn't ready to accept the truth just yet. I don't like this. Everything is changing and I don't know what to think, he exclaimed, standing up and running to his room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway as tears streamed down his face. He slammed the door, trying to shut out the world from his small bubble of pain and confusion. Mark felt his heart break as he watched Matthew's reaction. He's angry and confused. I didn't want this to be so hard for him, he thought, feeling helpless as tears finally fell from his eyes while he stared at the closed door. The guilt and sadness overwhelmed him, knowing that the revelation had shattered Matthew's world. Emily, trying to stay calm, placed her hand on Mark's shoulder. He needs time. Let's give him the space he needs, she said, trying to be strong, though she felt the same despair and sadness. She knew Mark was suffering as much as Matthew, and that both of them needed time to process everything. Mark nodded, knowing Emily was right. Yes, let's give him time, he agreed, feeling deeply sad, his eyes still wet with tears as he gazed at Matthew's closed door. Mark slowly stood up, feeling the weight of his emotions and the pain of seeing his son so hurt. Matthew, locked in his room, felt a whirlwind of emotions. My father was here all along and no one told me, he thought, feeling betrayed and confused. He loved his mother and trusted her, but this revelation changed everything. How can I trust them now, he wondered, crying silently as he tried to process all his feelings. The next few days were tense in Emily's home. Matthew avoided talking to both Emily and Mark about the matter, preferring to isolate himself in his room. He's suffering, Emily thought, feeling powerless. Mark, equally concerned, tried to give Matthew the space he needed. I hope he can understand and accept it, Mark thought, feeling a constant sadness. Finally, after several days, Mark couldn't bear the waiting any longer. He decided to go to Matthew's room and talk to him. I need to speak to him, I can't wait any longer, he thought, determined. He entered Matthew's room where the boy sat on his bed, staring into the distance. Matthew, can we talk? Mark asked, trying to remain calm. Matthew looked up at him, still feeling confused and hurt. What do you want, Mr. Mark? He asked, his voice full of emotion. Mark sat beside him, taking a deep breath. I know you're hurt and confused, and I want to apologize for not telling you sooner that I'm your father. I didn't tell you right away because I thought we needed to get to know each other and become friends first, he explained, feeling tears well up again. I didn't want it to be this hard for you. Seeing Mark cry, Matthew felt touched. Seeing an adult, especially someone he had started to admire, so vulnerable, stirred something deep inside his heart. Slowly, he moved closer to Mark, and with a small hand began to wipe away his tears. Don't cry, Dad, he said, his voice trembling but sincere. Mark, surprised and overwhelmed with emotion, looked at his son. I love you, my son, he responded, his voice cracking with emotion. Tears streaming freely down his face as he tried to express the depth of his feelings. Matthew, feeling safe in his father's arms, replied, I love you too, Dad, his voice soft and full of emotion, as if every word carried years of pent-up feelings. In that moment, all of Matthew's doubts and fears began to fade away, replaced by a sense of acceptance. This was the moment when Matthew finally accepted Mark as his father. They hugged tightly, an embrace filled with love, pain, and acceptance. Mark felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over him. We're going to face this together, Matthew. I'll always be here for you, he promised, holding his son with all the love he had, feeling the strength of the bond that had begun to form between them. Emily, watching the scene from the hallway, felt tears stream down her face. They've finally found each other, she thought, feeling a deep sense of joy and peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. The family was beginning to rebuild, united by love and truth. We're going to make it, she thought, her heart full of hope for Matthew's future. Mark began spending more time with Emily and Matthew, creating a new family routine. We're going to have a picnic in the park today, Mark suggested one Saturday morning, trying to bring some lightness to the situation. Emily smiled, appreciating the effort he was making. I think it's a great idea, Mark. What do you think, Matthew? She asked, looking at her son. Matthew, still adjusting to the constant presence of his father, gave a small smile and nodded. Yes, I like picnics, he replied, trying to hide the anxiety he still felt. In the park, the atmosphere was filled with joy. Matthew ran after a ball they had brought along, while Mark and Emily prepared the food. He's loosening up more, Emily observed, watching her son play. Mark nodded, feeling a mixture of happiness and hope. Yes, little by little, we're connecting. That's a good thing, he replied, trying not to show the anxiety he still felt about being fully accepted by Matthew. During the picnic, they began to talk about shared interests. I really like soccer, Matthew said, taking a bite of his sandwich. Mark smiled, remembering his own childhood. I used to love playing when I was your age. Maybe we can play together someday, he suggested, hoping to see a positive reaction. Matthew looked at him, his eyes shining with curiosity. Were you good at it, Dad? he asked, testing out the word he was starting to use more often. Mark felt his heart warm when he heard that. I tried my best. Maybe we can practice together, and we'll see if you're better than me, he joked, prompting a laugh from Matthew. Emily, watching the interaction between them, smiled with satisfaction. They're getting along well, she thought, feeling an inner peace she hadn't felt in a long time. It's good to see Matthew happy and beginning to accept Mark, she reflected, grateful for the progress they were making as a family. I'm so happy we're making this work, Emily said aloud without realizing it. Mark looked at her, gratitude visible in his eyes. I'm happy too, Emily. This means so much to me, he replied, his voice filled with emotion. As the day went on, the connection between them strengthened. Matthew began feeling more comfortable calling Mark Dad, and he did so more naturally. Dad, can you show me how to kick the ball like you used to? Matthew asked, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. Mark felt a surge of joy and pride. Of course, son. Let's practice right now, he said, taking the ball and positioning himself to show Matthew the technique. As they passed the ball back and forth, Emily sat on the picnic blanket, watching with a smile on her face. We're starting to become a real family, she thought, feeling more confident about the future. Every laugh from Matthew and every encouraging word from Mark reinforced this new dynamic. As the sun began to set, Mark realized how important the day had been for all of them. This has been a great start, he thought, feeling hopeful about the future. He looked at Matthew, who was starting to relax and feel more at ease. Thank you for today, Matthew. It was special for me, Mark said sincerely. For me too, Dad, Matthew replied with a genuine, unguarded smile. That moment solidified the progress they had made as a family. When they returned home, Emily observed the two with a sense of accomplishment. We're on the right path, she thought, her heart full of hope and love. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she felt confident that together they could overcome them. We'll keep going one step at a time, she reflected as they prepared to close out the day. Weekends became special moments of bonding. Mark organized activities for the three of them to participate in together. We're going to have a barbecue in the yard today, Mark announced on a sunny Saturday. Matthew ran to help, eager to spend the day with his parents. Dad, can I help light the grill? He asked, a mischievous smile on his face. Mark laughed, feeling incredibly happy. Of course, son, but carefully, okay? He replied, patiently showing Matthew how to handle it. Emily watched the two of them, feeling blessed to have such a close-knit family. These moments are precious, she thought, tears of happiness forming in her eyes. Evenings were filled with stories and laughter. Matthew, would you like to hear a bedtime story? Mark would ask, sitting by his son's bedside. Matthew would nod vigorously, pulling the covers up to his chin. Yes, Dad. I want to hear about your adventures when you were a kid, he said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Mark would smile, recalling his own childhood experiences. All right, here we go, he would start, while Emily sat beside them, feeling a part of every word and laugh they shared. The relationship between Mark and Emily continued to blossom. They found time for themselves, strengthening the love they felt for one another. During a special candlelight dinner, Mark felt it was the right moment to take the next step in their relationship. With a shy smile, he took a deep breath and said, Emily, spending this time with you and Matthew has been the best thing that's ever happened to me. I want to be by your side, not just as Matthew's father, but as your partner. Would you go out with me? He asked, his voice full of emotion and hope. Emily felt tears streaming down her face, unable to contain the joy that was overflowing within her. Yes, Mark, I'll go out with you, she said, hugging him tightly. Every moment together strengthened the connection and commitment they shared with each other. We're going to face everything together, she thought, feeling stronger and more confident with Mark by her side. A few months later, Emily and Mark decided to get married. The wedding was a celebration of love and unity. With Matthew standing by Mark and Emily, he felt part of something special and meaningful. I'm so happy for you both, he said, hugging them both. Mark and Emily felt complete, ready to face the future as a family. We're ready to build a bright future together, Mark thought, feeling stronger than ever. And so their new family continued to grow and flourish each day, bringing new challenges and joys, but always faced together. The acceptance and unconditional love they nurtured became the foundation of everything they built. Mark proved to be a dedicated father, Emily found the stability she had long needed, and Matthew grew up surrounded by the love and support of both his father and his mother. Together, they formed a strong family, ready to build a bright and promising future, filled with new memories and precious moments.